Hi, my name is Alan Hernandez, and today I'm doing a research presentation on who wrote Shakespeare. The question of authorship for Shakespeare's plays, books, and poems is still an ongoing topic today. Many people still believe that Shakespeare was nothing more than a pseudonym for the actual author. There's some evidence that suggests that, but there's much more that proves it otherwise. Who is Shakespeare? William Shakespeare was born in 1564. It is uncertain of the actual month and day that he was born, but according to church records, he was baptized on April 26, 1564, which during that time era, 3 days was a customary amount of time to baptize a newborn. So it is okay to speculate that William Shakespeare was born April 23, 1564, which, if that is true, that means he would have died on his birthday, April 23, 1616, just 52 years later. Which during his 52-year lifespan, Shakespeare has written many books, plays, and poems. His most famous include Hamlet, A Midsummer's Night Dream, Macbeth, and probably the most famous amongst all age groups is Romeo and Juliet. But something most people do not know about Romeo and Juliet is that Shakespeare had written Romeo and Juliet after reading an epic poem called Romeus and Juliet. The epic poem Romeus and Juliet had very similar themes and plots as Romeo and Juliet. It is almost as if Shakespeare had took the last two letters of Romeus and added an O to make Romeo, which is why the question of Shakespeare's authorship may abide with a group of individuals who claim authorship right. Notably, the most famous theory for the true authorship of Shakespeare is the Baconian theory. This theory states that Sir Francis Bacon is the true author of Shakespeare. Bacon wrote the plays for Shakespeare to take credit for them. There are many reasons why he did this, but the most common and accepted reason was that Bacon's rise to higher office would have been hindered if it was known that Bacon wrote plays for a public stage. Thus, the plays were written by Sir Francis Bacon but were credited to William Shakespeare, who was merely a front to shield the identity of Bacon. There is evidence like Bacon's attitude, philosophy, vocabulary, wit, and interest matched that to be found in Shakespeare's works. There is also evidence of Sir Francis Bacon being called a concealed poet by many of his friends. Bacon also relished the idea of poetry and theater being a branch of learning Bacon described as a source of delight and means of educating people to virtue. But the most compelling evidence is that of the Shakespeare Memorial at Stratton-upon-Avon. There, the memorial describes of two Shakespeares. One is described as a famous statesman, philosopher, and scholar poet who lives immortal in Olympus, which is said to uniquely fit and describe Sir Francis Bacon. Whilst the last two lines is in abbreviated Latin, note the age and date of death of the mortal actor Shakespeare. Orville Ward Owen was the first person to use another method known as the cipher wheel. The cipher wheel would collate pages from the works of Shakespeare, Bacon, and a variety of other authors, and was able to combine passages and writing styles to see if there was any connection between them. Owen described this process as a word cipher. He would use the cipher wheel to try and find connections between Shakespeare, Bacon, and other authors, but couldn't find any concrete evidence that Bacon was a true author of Shakespeare. Here is a picture of Orville Ward Owen on the left, and to the right is a replica of his cipher wheel. The cipher wheel would use thousand-foot cloth to type out any patterns or words or phrases that matched in any of the works. But as stated, Orville could not find any distinctive connection between Bacon or Bacon and Shakespeare. Another theory proposed by the Oxfordians was that Hamlet was just nothing merely more than an autobiography of Edward de Vere. Oxfordians try to convince people that when Edward de Vere was 12, his father died under mysterious circumstances. The real mystery, though, is what source did they use for this claim? The only one that makes sense is Hamlet. In the book, the prince's father died of foul play. Hamlet is Oxford, ergo Oxford's father must have died of foul play too. But John de Vere made a will on July 28, 1562, and died 6 days later, which suggests that the cause of death was either illness or natural causes. There is no contemporary evidence that suggests otherwise, which means that the Oxfordians are only trying to make this theory stick rather than prove it right. There is no real evidence here to determine that all this is true. The only evidence is that John de Vere had made a will 6 days before he died, which means that John de Vere knew that he was going to die soon, so how can it have been a mystery on how he died? That's the only concrete evidence, and it goes against what the Oxfordians are trying to prove. In a somewhat recent TED-Ed presentation, Aaron Williams states that there is a method known as stylometry. This method is the idea that each writer's styles have certain characteristics that remain fairly uniform among individual works. Example characteristics include sentence length, the arrangement of words, or even the number of occurrences of a particular word. The stylometrists have concluded that Shakespeare is none other than Shakespeare. The Pretender's works just don't match up with Shakespeare's signature style. However, there is compelling evidence of collaboration. For example, William Shakespeare collaborated with playwright Christopher Marlowe on Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2. Shakespeare's true identity was brought out through the method of stylometry. In conclusion, there's no real connection between Sir Francis Bacon and William Shakespeare. It's mostly all speculation. William Shakespeare is a true person and is the true author of his own works. Then that means that Shakespeare is the one and only true author of Shakespeare. The Bard is really the Bard.